Hello and welcome to the Business Channel. Manufacturing accounts for about 13% of the UK's output and employs around 8% of the workforce. One of the biggest challenges, though, for the sector is resourcing, as we found out when we spoke to Manpower.
Manpower is a global leader in the provision of resource on a contingent and permanent basis to over 4,000 clients in the UK. We operate from over 300 offices, providing the right people with the right skills at the right time to our client base. That is so important today to make sure that the UK stays competitive in the world of work.
We think there may well be a revival in UK manufacturing. Each quarter, Manpower surveys 2,100 employers, and within the manufacturing sector, some of these clients are telling us that their hiring intentions are the most positive they've been since the financial crisis in 2008.
Manpower employs over 5,000 people in manufacturing across the whole of the UK, and that's from people from the shop floor to production assistants to technical engineers and production directors. But it's not only finding the number of people that is the challenge, but sometimes it's finding the niche skills. Where do you find, for example, 20 clay modelers from somewhere in the UK? In fact, we may have to go global to do that.
The growth in manufacturing may well be restrained because there are not the skills available for certain types of manufacturing groups, particularly in the mechanical engineering and some of the higher skilled project management roles. What we're seeing is fewer bright young graduates entering the sector, and we're seeing less and less investment in many parts of that sector, particularly during the downturn when organisations had to shed staff and do less with more people. So unless this is readdressed, then we are going to see a great difficulty in attracting the brightest and best to UK manufacturing. The image has to be addressed, particularly when it comes to remuneration and job security. There has been such negative PR around manufacturing, certainly through the job entrant group in the last 5 or 7 years, that they are not naturally attracted to want to be in the manufacturing sector. They feel they can get other better well-paid work outside of the manufacturing sector. Our experience says this isn't necessarily true, particularly for professional and skilled tradespeople, and this is the area that we would encourage graduates and school leavers to really think about where they should come and enter into the manufacturing sector. It's going to be critical that organisations look to invest in new entrants into the employment market, as well as continuing to upskill existing workers to make sure that the manufacturing can remain a vibrant part of our economy.
Training is very important in the manufacturing sector. It is becoming even more important because there's a real talent shortage out there. So that has to be enhanced by providing people with the right training at the right time. It's about teachable fit. Who can we bring in who can learn the skills, develop in the right way to deliver for our clients in the future? And this is going to be involving things like apprenticeships, detailed training schemes, mentoring. All of these things are going to be very important going forward to ensure that the UK has the right people with the right skills to deliver not only today but tomorrow.
With manufacturing being a major contributor to the economy, the government is keen to support the sector through the current economic downturn.
I think the government has a very important role in encouraging manufacturing by being a good and effective partner. That doesn't mean trying to run the businesses, it means creating the right long-term environment. So a simpler tax system that reduces the corporation tax rate, so money can be reinvested back into industry and into capital, making sure that in skills terms we're actually improving and increasing the number of apprenticeships so that industry gets the skilled workforce it needs. It means investing in infrastructure so that actually the UK is an efficient place in which to do business. That's why we're retaining the spending levels for infrastructure that we've inherited from the last government, and it's why we're investing in high-speed rail to make sure that we get that improvement in public transport. So I think the crucial point from government's role is to be an effective partner, always wanting to look at how we can improve the conditions of manufacturing here in the UK, because I'm always mindful that we are competing with countries abroad. So we've always got to make sure the UK is a good place in which to do business. I mean, I know talking to businesses that they do find that accessing finance is a problem. We should remember that 2/3 of the smallest businesses get the money they seek in terms of loans or in terms of overdrafts, and in fact nearly 85% of medium-sized firms also get the money that they're actually seeking. So it is a problem, but it's not quite one that affects every business. But what are we doing about it? Well, first of all, we've asked the banks, and they've now brought forward a lending code and an appeals process, so that if a business has a problem, they've got a means by challenging the bank if they think they've been dealt with unfairly. Secondly, we've also made sure that we are helping in terms of the enterprise finance guarantee, so government is underwriting loans made by the banks, and we think this will unlock about 2 billion in loans over the next 4 years. Then on the equity side, just as important if you're growing your business, we're investing 200 million in what we call the enterprise capital funds, and these are targeted at the high-growing, capital-intensive businesses, sometimes in industry, other times, for example, particularly in the low-carbon field. So it's that rounded approach, I think, as well as new initiatives on things like supply chain finance, that we think will actually free up the market and give businesses much more choice.
The cost of manufacturing equipment and technology has long been an issue for the manufacturing sector. I spoke to the Shire Business Group about how companies can overcome this through looking at alternative sources of finance. We're hearing now that the UK economy is more and more relying on an upsurge in manufacturing, which perhaps wasn't the case a few decades ago. And how can you help in this regard?
Obviously, manufacturing is the lifeblood of any economy. And although certainly in the fourth quarter of the last century there was a dip in the proportion of manufacturing in Great Britain, it's still vital to Great Britain UK PLC. There's two areas in which we can assist manufacturing. Firstly is that we can fund the manufacturing equipment, which is very costly. Big ticket items, production line equipment, distribution equipment, and we can provide the funding for that, which preserves their cash flow, and they can pay for those funding payments out of the future sales of the products they make. Secondly, as a sales aid lessor, we can produce innovative programs which manufacturers or their resellers can use to actually sell their products to the business community. And the biggest objection to any capital equipment purchase will be cost. And what leasing allows you to do is to break down that cost to a much lower common denominator, and it could be quarterly, it could be monthly, it could be daily. But that makes it easier for the businessman to accept that cost rather than an outright purchase. And these products have been used by most equipment sectors for the last 50 years.
How do you think leasing fits into the picture overall of lending to businesses?
I think leasing is ideal for business finance acquisitions. Equipment can be bought on a lease. It releases therefore bank overdrafts and other secured lending, their cash, which they should use for other things such as marketing, employment costs, whatever. So we can tailor packages for businesses that will extend their existing cash flow and improve their liquidity.
Well, now I'm here with the other co-chairman of Shire Business Group, Martin Smith. Thank you for joining us. Now, what type of financial products do you supply, and how does that help companies who need extra capital?
We've had a massive amount of success with a range of products that we've either had for many years or we've brought into the group. Things like leasing, which we've always done, hire purchase we do more and more of. We do secured lending, which is something that's relatively new to the group. Things like credit card securitisation, invoice finance, grants, you know, they've, just to name a few, have come into our particular wardrobe of products that we offer to our customer base. And the benefit of that, of course, is when they need solutions, there is something there that we can actually use, sit down with them, decide which is the best solution for them, and hopefully we've got a customer for life.
Now, how small or large amounts will you lend, and what kind of checks and balances do you put on the companies you lend to?
In terms of size of loans that we're prepared to look at, we will go from very small loans of £1,000 for a coffee machine up to £500,000, £750,000 loan for a piece of materials handling equipment or production line equipment. Checks and balances, we put more into the bigger loans, quite obviously, because we have to fully understand the cash flow position of the company. We have to make sure that our investment is safe in their hands. You don't always get it right, the people disappear, and we do have quite a few liquidations and administrations going through at the moment, but that's part of the thing that you have to price into your leasing offering.
Manufacturers have remained relatively stable through the recent recession, and they're not just benefiting from a weaker pound, as Terry Schooler from the manufacturers organisation EEF told me.
Manufacturing is on the up because of a combination of both the competitive pound and I think the ability of manufacturing leaders to take advantage of the recovery. The competitive pound has undoubtedly helped since the latter part of 2008, but British manufacturing leaders have demonstrated the resilience. They've kept labour force and skills during that recession, and through the process of innovation they've demonstrated that they can take advantage of these recovering and emerging export markets.
Now, which sort of manufacturer is doing particularly well? Which of your members is driving the revival?
I'm pleased to report that all sectors across manufacturing are performing well. That there's the possibility of a downside here in terms of construction. Construction came out of the recession slower than the other parts of the sectors, and of course it's patchy. But other than that, this is across the board. Difficult to highlight any particular part of the sector, but if I was to, I'd probably quote mechanical, heavy investment, mechanical engineering, perhaps linked of course to those growing, emerging and export markets.
How attractive do you think manufacturing is as an activity in its own right? Isn't it better to find a high value idea and then let someone else make it?
I think there are two issues there in terms of describing the attractiveness of manufacturing. I think one is we have to recognise that over the last couple of decades, manufacturing has not had a particularly attractive or good image, and I think it would be wrong of us not to recognise that. But I believe that is changing, and I believe it's changing quite strongly as a result, in part from that recession. I think the other point you make is of course linked to where manufacturing should take place. Manufacturing is a great wealth generator. About 53% of our exports come from manufacturing, about 70% of our research and development in business comes from manufacturing, and of course it's a double positive whammy when we export what we've got here. And I think there is a clear link, whether or not we wish to face up to it or not, there is a clear link that where research and development is undertaken in the main, that tends to be where the manufacturing or production takes place.
I mean, it can't be denied, though, that labour costs are so much cheaper in other countries, like in the Far East. And how can we compete on manufacturing if we're having to pay so much more for labour?
You're absolutely right. Labour costs, of course, are cheaper in the Far East and indeed in other parts of the world. But cost is only one aspect of competitiveness. Quality is clearly a big driver. Aftermarket or customer support, as we call it, and of course continuity of supply are also very important issues.
Do you see Britain as being just a location for small-scale specialists, or do you see large-scale manufacturing happening?
No, I don't see us just as being a place for SMEs, as we call it. We have a very strong SME market. I think it's fair to say that over the last 2 or 3 decades we have seen a large number of British manufacturing assets being bought up, and therefore we do have an issue, and it would be wrong not to state it, that We do have an issue therefore that we do not have as many larger companies, say above 250 or 500 employees, as some of our other competitor nations. But, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have a very strong SME base, and one of our challenges here in the UK is to grow that base and make those companies substantially bigger and stronger.
Well, Terry Schooler, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Product innovation is key to Britain's ability to remain at the cutting edge of global industry, but manufacturers need to be confident that their ideas are protected. I put this to Anna Hatt from the trademark and patent attorneys Beck Greener.
Intellectual property protection is a group of legal rights used to protect ideas, inventions and branding. Some of the rights arise automatically, such as copyright, and others need to be applied for, and that includes patents, registered trademarks and registered designs. It might be helpful to give you an example of how a British product is protected by intellectual property. So if we look at an Aston Martin car, it would have patents to protect its technology, it would have registered designs to protect its appearance, and it would have registered trademarks to protect its name. And although intellectual property is intangible, the rights are really quite valuable. And in fact, a recent study reported by the government said that the value of British products protected by intellectual property is about £65 billion a year.
Now, why should companies seek IP protection?
Well, a company which has IP protection for an invention or for a brand is able to exclude other competitors from the market for a defined period of time, which is of course very helpful for profits. And it may also be able to use its intellectual property as an asset which can be licensed to come up with an additional stream of income. An example of how this works is the case of Dyson and Hoover. You probably know that Dyson had patent protection for its bagless vacuum cleaner technology. And then when Hoover launched its own competing bagless vacuum cleaner product, Dyson was able to get that product off the market by using its patent, and it also got an award of £4 million in damages. And there's an additional new reason now to get patent protection, which is the so-called patent box. That's a new low rate of corporation tax, which the government's planning to introduce in April 2013 for profits relating to patents. And GlaxoSmithKline has already announced a £500 million in UK manufacturing as a direct result of that patent box.
Now, what do you say to your clients that the risks are of not being protected?
Well, we say that a manufacturing company without intellectual property protection risks simply giving its ideas to its competitors for free when its product goes on the market. And that leaves it in a worse position than its competitors because, of course, they won't have made the same sort of investment in developing the idea. And the problem's particularly serious for companies in areas where research and development costs are very high, such as the pharmaceutical industry. But even simpler products such as the Black & Decker Workmate, which was the subject of patent protection, take a long time to develop. And on the trademark side, the owner of a brand who doesn't have trademark protection risks copycat products. If we think of a brand such as Marmite, the reason that supermarkets aren't able to sell their own spread and call it Marmite is because Marmite has trademark protection.
Now, we think of patenting something as being very expensive. What kind of costs are involved?
Well, the good news is that some intellectual property protection is available for free. Copyright and other rights which arise automatically, some trademark rights and some design rights have no cost associated because they simply come into being when the work is created. Applying for a registered design or a registered trademark in the UK should cost typically something like £500, including professional assistance. Patents have a reputation, as you say, for being very expensive, but in fact it should be possible to get a granted patent in the UK and Europe and the US for less than the cost of a full-page advertisement in a national newspaper.
Manufacturers are also having to keep pace with changing legislation. One example of this is the Bribery Act, as our reporter Jane Bennett-Powell found out, speaking to Kevin Robinson from Irwin Mitchell.
The Bribery Act is a modern restatement of the various manifestations of the criminal offence of bribery. It is a replacement for outdated Victorian and Edwardian statutes that have no relevance whatsoever to modern commercial practice. Its structure is relatively simple. It creates 4 new offences. The first is rewarding by paying bribes, rewarding improper behaviour. The second is requesting or receiving bribes in return for improper behaviour. The third is bribing foreign government officials. And the fourth, which is completely new and probably unique in the world, is the corporate offence of failing to prevent bribery being carried out on behalf of the corporate.
How common is bribery within the manufacturing sector?
Bribery is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It's endemic in certain parts of the world. In certain parts of the world it's part of the culture. There's just no avoiding that unpalatable to some people truth. And it's prevalent in all strata of society.
How does business deal with it then?
Well, in order not to be prosecuted, business will have to deal with bribery by not engaging in it. It's as basically as simple as that. The Bribery Act that we are subject to, and foreign corporations who conduct business in the UK are also subject to, is the most far-reaching and draconian statute on the planet. It makes the US anti-bribery legislation look weak. It far exceeds anything that the OECD require us to do. The only safe thing is not to get involved in bribery events. That may mean not engaging in markets where there is no opportunity not to get involved in bribery events. It's a simple fact of life.
What do new businesses need to know about the Bribery Act?
Well, it's not just new businesses, in fact it's any business. What they need to know is their exposure. They need to know the risks that their processes, from raw materials coming in the door to finished goods going out of the door to them being sold, what risks the processes expose them to, both in the markets that they are engaged in, and that's market sectors as well as geographic markets. They need to know what risks their employees expose them to, from the boardroom down to the shop floor. They need to know what the penalties are, and the penalties for conviction under the Bribery Act are very, very serious indeed. For a corporation, it's an unlimited fine, but more significantly, for a corporation, it can mean debarment from public contracts. If there is a conviction for bribery, it's automatic, instantaneous and permanent debarment from public contracts.
How much could companies begin to worry that, okay, in principle, it's a good act, but this is going to damage my business?
There is a huge disconnect between the very, very worthy intentions. One listens to Kofi Annan's pronouncements on the inherent evil of corruption. And there is that level of intellectual approach. There is a disconnect between that and the truth on the ground, where in certain parts of the world, in order to get through an immigration desk with a valid visa and a valid passport, you still need to pay money. It's the truth on the ground that in some countries where blood tests have to be given for an extra $50, you can have a clean needle. It's a truth on the ground that if your bananas are rotting in a warehouse, if you pay for the men to work overtime, you'll get your paperwork stamped that night. There's a disconnect between the truth on the ground, there's a disconnect between reality and the theoretical ideas that lie behind this anti-corruption legislation.
Manufacturing in particular is vulnerable to accidents and the lawsuits and compensation claims that follow. I spoke to Barry Tupper from IOH, Industrial and Organisational Health, about how they can help. What is your main approach in working with a new business?
We assess what their current standards are and how they approach health and safety at work. We do an audit of their practices, and then we try and get them to improve on their current practices and see where we can improve that by putting our professional staff in there to assist them to do that.
What are the key areas to focus on in achieving cost-effective safety?
I believe it's including health and safety at the planning stage, making sure that it's an integral part of the engineering process for any new projects that are being introduced, any workplace improvements that are being introduced, making sure that all of the staff are aware of the health and safety issues that may be arising. An example of that is the work that we did up at Nissan with introducing some press machinery for the new press plant. A 5,000 ton press, which was the biggest press to be installed in the UK, made by Hitachi in Japan. We spent a lot of time with the design engineers in Japan, designing the safety systems, making sure they were right and making sure that it was safe to bring into the UK. We introduced a three-stage buy-off process, so we inspected it in Japan to make sure it was correct and safe, installed in the UK safely and inspected again, and then inspected a third time before it was handed over to production for final use. And getting all that right at the planning stage saves considerable costs for refurbishing, re-engineering at a later stage if you get it wrong. So that is essential.
And what was the worry with the press, that someone would get trapped in it?
Yes, it's a huge press. You can park a transit van, for example, on the bed of the press, and you wouldn't get two chances if it came down on top of you. So you have to make sure that it's fully integrated safety systems in there. Yes.
Are there any particular sectors, say manufacturing or other sectors, where health and safety is most crucial?
Well, I think in all sectors health and safety is crucial, whether it's within an office environment where you have a lot of work with display screen equipment, for example, and the employees see the stresses of working very closely on telecommunications and that sort of thing, down to engineering works where you have high risk of machinery and chemicals. So every industry has its risk. So you cannot say that there's no risk in any industry, or some is less than others. Sickness absence in local government, for example, is much higher than in manufacturing. So it is important in all sectors.
And finally, what benefits do companies get out of good health and safety management?
The cost benefits are enormous. We're trying to encourage employers to make strong leadership in management and from the directors of companies to make sure that the cost benefits are assessed and seen. Very few companies actually do a cost benefit analysis on their health and safety, how much their sickness absence costs them, how much accidents cost them, how much ill health costs. The cost to the British economy of ill health at work is estimated between 22 and 100 billion per year, which is enormous figures, and you try and put that across to an SME, for example, it just goes over their heads. So you have to do some assessment on their impact, on what their sickness absence is costing them and what their accidents are costing them. And that's quite simple to do. There are tools out there to assist you to do that.
Well, that's just about all we've got time for now. If you'd like to find out more about any of the organisations that we featured on this programme, then look at our website, thebusinesschannel.tv. Bye-bye for now.